Listen to Jon Haaven, your Republican candidate for the United States Congress.
As many of you may know, I've spent 11 years as a television newscaster and 4 years in the Minnesota State Legislature, and it taught me a lot about government, crisis, and most importantly, about people. You know, many are saying that today our government is in a crisis, and that's really why I'm sitting here now to talk to you about why I want to be your next United States Congressman. It's sometimes popular to talk about politicians in a negative way. Some say, you can't believe a word of them. Others say there's absolutely no difference between candidates. They're all alike. In my race for Minnesota's 7th District congressional seat, I want you to know that there are some very real and basic differences between Bob Bergland and me. First and foremost, there's the entire congressional system at stake here. The Democrats have controlled Congress 38 out of the last 42 years. They've turned the Agriculture Committee into a tobacco, cotton, and peanut lobby. Our agriculture is not oriented toward tobacco, cotton, and peanut interests. The incumbent has voted to organize Congress for the powers that be, and you know that the chairman of these committees have more power when it comes to domestic legislation than the President of the United States. Bob Bergland has fought President Nixon 7 out of every 10 times he's had the chance. I offer an alternative. I support a change in the seniority system. I most definitely support President Richard Nixon. If Republicans can turn it around, Midwestern lawmakers would run the Agriculture Committee. You know, our people here in central and northwestern Minnesota are fiscally and economically conservative people. They feel a tremendous burden of federal spending. They believe in responsible and fiscal management. Bob Bergland was the only rural Minnesota congressman not to receive the Watchdog of the Treasury Award given federal legislators who exercise wise money management in important legislative votes. He was one of only 24 of the 435-member Congress, in fact, who got a 0 rating from the National Treasury Watchdog Organization of Small Businessmen. As many Republicans, independents, and DFLers alike have told me, his votes are clearly out of touch with his rural constituents. There was Bergland's vote forcing increased spending and burdensome paperwork on our small farmers and businessmen. Fortunately, the Congress saw fit to defeat this measure, despite his efforts. I would be a Treasury watchdog. I would go to bat for our interests here in the 7th District. Agriculture, recreation, and rural industrial development would be my special interests. And I have some very real questions about the abuses of our present welfare system. You know, people working at a job should, to my way of thinking, live better than able-bodied people who aren't working. My opponent apparently doesn't agree in total. He voted to allow strikers the right to public food stamps. In effect, the taxpayer then intervenes on the side of the striker. Our studies have shown that governmental spending is your primary concern. As a legislator and as a member of the Minnesota Tax Study Commission, I have a record that sharply contrasts my opponent. I favor zero-based budgeting, where yearly each federal program considered for appropriation should justify in detail every dollar. My opponent has voted for virtually every spending matter that came down the pike, using his opposition to some defense appropriations as a scapegoat. And on a current issue, I really think it's about time all our congressmen started exercising some fiscal restraint. It's about time they started setting their own priorities and then living up to them, which is even more important. Bob Bergland has been the most expensive congressman in the history of our district here. And there are even more issues that separate us. I would have favored the constitutional amendment to allow prayer in public schools. Bob Bergland voted against it. I don't favor busing of school children. Bob Bergland voted for it. I will not follow the political line of our big city labor bosses. Bob Bergland has been one of their closest allies in the United States Congress. You know, he once commented that he could not expect to win re-election by running on his record. Well, I think that is all we have to judge him by. As a state legislator, my job was to understand local problems and represent these interests at the state capitol in St. Paul. And if elected 2 years from now, I would proudly come back and defend my votes as in your best interests. I believe with all that I have that we can do better in Washington with Haaven. And on behalf of my family, I'd like to thank you for your very warm reception during this campaign, and I'd like to thank the Haaven Volunteer Committee for bringing you this message.
Put people before politics. For a change, elect Jon Haaven to Congress.